Does it feel like every part of your life is divided? Every scenario, every environment, your church, your school, your work, your friends, left, right, conservative, liberal, religious, secular. It seems you always have to take a side. This is a conversation between a progressive Christian and a conservative atheist who happen to be great friends. Welcome to Living on Common Ground.
Hey, do you think if we met today, we would still be friends?
I don't know, but we're friends now.
Man, so what? We won a few games. And y'all fools think that's something? Man, that ain't nothing, y'all. And you know what else? We ain't nothing either. Yeah, we came together in camp. Cool. But then we're right back here and the world tells us that they don't want us to be together. We fall apart like we ain't a damn bit of nothing, man. And y'all think we done won something? Man, we ain't won nothing, y'all.
This week's episode is a re-release of the first episode of Living on Common Ground, which was originally published on November 3rd, 2023. We decided to clean up the audio and share it again because in this episode, you'll get a chance to learn a bit more about Lucas and Jeff as they discuss the problems which arise when we only know other persons by labels and avatars. These labels are sometimes placed on us, and other times we actively try to present them as our true selves to the world. But these labels, which often are intended to identify affinity, more often than not lead to division. So, conservative atheist and progressive pastor. And I was thinking about that. Am I a progressive pastor?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
All right. So I don't identify as a progressive pastor. I consider myself to be a moderate.
Okay.
Because...
Do you mean that you don't identify as a progressive, or is it both of those words together? You don't identify as a progressive pastor in particular?
So, okay, I use the word progressive, not liberal, because liberal is political in my mind and progressive has to do theologically.
Okay.
I do think that I am maybe I am progressive now that I say it out loud. But I think that, I guess what I'm trying to say is that in my experience, I guess also for full disclosure, I'm a United Methodist.
Sure.
I think that might be important to the conversation.
Okay, yeah.
Because in the United Methodist Church, we're facing a potential split.
Yeah.
Well, it's already happening, right? You've already got churches disaffiliating. As we're sitting here on November 2nd, 2023.
And it's been happening for a while, right?
Yeah, but the official disaffiliation stuff going Global Methodist is just this year. Really started this year, but the talk of disaffiliation has been going on for a while now.
Okay.
So anyway, but within the United Methodist Church, you've got the way that it was described to me is you have progressives, you have moderates, or they call them centrists, right? And then you have the conservative, or which I would refer to as, in the past, I would always refer to sort of as the fundamentalist.
Okay.
Because again, conservative has more of a political connotation.
Sure.
Or association. That being said, I recently did have a conversation where someone pointed out to me quite correctly that you have fundamentalists that are both progressive and conservative. And so I guess when I say that I consider myself more of a moderate or a centrist, it's that even though that my theology is probably quite progressive, but I would argue still within the Christian camp, socially, I don't know, I'm having a hard time explaining this. Because I am committed to being part of a community where everyone experiences a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
If I self-identify too far left, I would naturally begin to exclude people. And so I have a desire.
Because everything rises and falls on leadership.
I don't know about that, but I think that...
I just said that to mess with you.
I know. But I think that for me, myself personally, whether I'm in leadership or not, if I begin to identify too far one way or the other, I will inadvertently find myself. Okay, so I did for a while, like I had to come back to the middle.
Okay.
All right. So I not too long ago, a few years ago, I got really frustrated with what I was referring to as fundamentalists
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like, well, for all why it's not important, but I found myself where I had reached the point where I was wanting people. I was wanting to not associate with particular types of people.
Sure.
And then one day I realized that I had become the very thing that I didn't like about the quote unquote others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I began to move my way back to the middle. And so while theologically I am probably even more progressive than I was at that time, within the community, I'm realizing this is a very hard thing to sort of identify, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. I mean, we talked about this before that that words are just mouth sounds, right? And we have to try to. I mean, you could say that we have to try to define them, although I think what we really mean when we talk about definitions is meaning, and we're trying to convey some sort of meaning behind the words. And of course, the words that we're going to use to convey the meaning, they themselves can be construed in lots of different ways, right? And so, it's really difficult. And it's one of the things that, I don't want to speak for you, but it makes it so that I don't ever, I feel allergic to labels. And that sounds like such a California thing to say. Is that I'm just not really into labels, man. But the problem with them is that obviously we attach labels as shortcuts in order to live, right? And you can trace that back. That's a really fundamental evolutionary skill to attach labels so that you can shortcut and move on to something else, move on to something that's a little bit more complicated, right? Mm-hmm. You start categorizing, I don't know, you could think you start categorizing particular colors of berries. Now, you just say red berries. I'm not going to eat red berries, right? Well, there's a lot of red berries you could eat, so you're going to miss out on that. But it shortcuts it so that at least you get rid of all the poisonous ones. You move on to the ones that you can't eat, right? So it seems to me like that's a very strong evolutionary skill that's taken humanity quite a ways, right? And so then we try to start applying this idea of taking off labels and trying to think about these meanings more in depth, and it becomes really difficult. As soon as you say progressive, somebody's going to have a pretty probably they're going to have, unless they've never heard the word before, which I don't think that's likely.
Right?
They're going to have a really particular idea of what you think, how you think about them, depending on how they identify and how the people that they hang out with, what kind of shows you watch, probably what kind of car you drive, if you have a gun in your home, if like they're going to have a whole litany of ideas,
right,
surrounding that, and then you just become an avatar. And I think part of what might be necessary, what I think is probably necessary to build this community that you're trying to build, that we're all trying to build, of making sure that, everyone has this sense of belonging, is that we've got to, I mean, I don't see how you can build that community if it's made up of avatars, right?
Mm-hmm.
If everyone is just, if everyone feels, if I feel comfortable to slide into my avatar and project that constantly, I don't see how you make that community, because that just seems to me like a whole bunch of elements bouncing off of each other until they achieve enough energy to explode and destroy the community. Right. And so I totally understand how it's difficult to describe, and as soon as you start describing, you say, okay, so am I a progressive pastor? Well, what does that mean? And you start describing it. Well, now that description needs a description, right? And now I've got to talk to you about, I don't want you to think that I think this. So I'm gonna tell you a whole story about when I was 10 that gives me bona fides for not thinking this other thing over here, right? So yeah, I mean when I if I describe myself as an atheist, when I say I don't, that's what's difficult about saying I'm an atheist. I rejected that label for a really long time, mostly because I don't want people to think particular things about me. And it's going to take me, 14 hours to describe what I mean by that and what I don't mean by that. And at the end of it, I think you're probably not going to have the exact picture that I'm trying to place in your mind about me. Also, that sounds pretty egoic as well.
So okay, here's where I'm thinking. So we were talking about the purpose for us sitting down and putting together these series of recordings is so that we're looking at 2024 coming up.
Yep.
And which means we're coming up on an election year in our country, which means if history shows us anything, it's going to get even more divisive than we currently are.
Yep, I'd imagine.
All right. That's going on. We also are sitting here at this time, some of us anyway, tuning in every day to see what new development is going on in Israel and Palestine. And you've got that conflict, that war breaking out or reigniting, however you want to word it, with more and more players seem to sort of entering into the fray. And we're watching that closely, which is also, interestingly enough, further dividing our communities here in the United States, as you have people now simply just flying either an Israeli flag or a Palestinian flag. And again, you're talking about labels, makes me think about nuance of all things. And you can't it's too easy, I think, to just start flying flags.
Yeah.
Because again, we've had this conversation in the past. The purpose for a flag is often, I think the result of a flag is often divisive. It claims territory. And so anyway, all right.
Yeah.
So the point,
flags in your profile picture. Flags Ukrainian flags was the thing, right? For the last 12 months, 12 or 18 months.
Which interestingly enough didn't cause any controversy.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay. But then again, back to the United Methodist Church, which we're not going to make this about the United Methodist Church.
Right.
But this is just a context thing.
Yep.
We also then next year have what we call General Conference, which is where globally all of the elected delegates come together to make decisions about the future of the church, which is also can be quite a controversial time. So we've got all of this going on. And then you and I are part of a community here in Mount Juliet, where our goal is to create a space where all persons experience a sense of belonging.
Yep.
Regardless of what you believe, who you vote for, the color of your skin, who you love, where you were born, which interestingly enough sounds a little silly, but I was having a discussion at your house on Friday night with one of your friends who was like, I don't like to tell people I'm from California. So
I mean, feel that.
It's a real thing, right?
Yep.
And so we're creating that community. So we were talking about having conversations about topics that could traditionally lead to some controversy. But how is it that a progressive pastor and a conservative atheist are able to be friends when on a piece of paper, it looks like we should be diametrically opposed to one another?
Right.
Right. And so how do we model through a podcast, through recordings, what it is we're trying to do as a community? And so we thought, well, let's take some of these topics. And so I think the first topic we were going to talk about was church and state, which obviously we're going to sort of wade into the water. Then we're not going to jump in. That's tongue in cheek.
Sure.
But I'm thinking, actually what might be a better conversation for this first one is let's talk a little bit about labels.
Okay.
Because I think that labels actually, I think the reason labels are a good place to start is because we often, use labels to identify, to come up with affinity, like we were talking about before we started recording, right? And so, okay, you and I are, so this is just like the fake you, right? Oh, so you and I, we're both conservatives, which makes us, we're alike.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get together, or you and I are both progressives. And so we'll get together
Mm-hmm.
and we'll talk about how bad the conservatives are.
Right.
And that becomes our affinity. And so I think that labels are a good place to start, so we can sort of get our mind wrapped around, well, what is the purpose of a label? Why? How do we end up with labels? And are they really healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we've talked about labels before, and I've talked about them in terms of light and dark. Does that spark a memory for you?
Say more about it, because I'm sure I'll remember it. But
Okay. So I read, it's interesting because people will get mad at me when I use Paul to argue for the inclusion of LGBTQ plus persons in the church, because one of the clobber verses, it comes from Paul in his writing. And so anyway, but Paul talks about this idea of there's no longer Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, Jew or Gentile, right?
Sure.
And that we're all one in Christ. All right. So I have in the past said that we should think about what would those labels be today that we use to create sort of these divisions.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too, then, is if you look at like the Gospel of John, or you look at the letters of John, and you sort of start looking at the Bible as a whole, what you begin to see is there is this contrast that's being set up. So like for John, he talks about there's the light and there's the darkness, and there's the things that are of the darkness and the things that are of the light. And so you take sort of what Paul is saying, that within the light, there are no labels, but within the darkness, labels are created of the world. Labels are created of the world, but within the light, within sort of that God's kingdom, God's reign, labels no longer hold sway.
Okay.
Right? And so then, in my mind, which I have a tendency to I enjoy overthinking.
I've noticed.
Yeah. I think to myself, well, that means labels eventually will cease to exist. Okay, so that means all labels, which then quickly becomes a slippery slope for some. Because what labels... So we can easily say, no, we need to be done with labels. Let's get rid of labels, right? So I don't want to be called a progressive pastor because of all the baggage that comes with the term progressive, which, by the way, I do not own a gun.
Okay.
Right?
All right. So now we're getting down to it. Let's make our list.
I do not own a gun, but I drive a Toyota Tundra, and I'm lucky to get 18 miles to a gallon.
Is that a progressive car?
No, not at all. I should be driving.
Well, we all know it should be a Subaru. Come on.
No,
obviously.
Well, I would actually love to have a Forester.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
But how I probably should be driving a Tesla.
Yeah. Well.
Right.
Well, wait a sec now. A Tesla. Okay. Maybe a Prius.
Larry drives a Prius.
You can. There you go. There you go. You can't be rolling around in Elon Musk's X car as a progressive pastor, right?
Right. Because then the other thing too is you add the pastor thing to it, and I probably shouldn't be driving a Tundra because they're expensive.
Yeah,
so I probably should be driving a little beater.
Yeah, but as a pastor, you got to have a pickup truck so that you are always prepared to help somebody move, right? That's like part of it.
You'd be surprised how much stuff I move.
You can load stuff up in the back of that.
Even dirt, like dirt, firewood. Hey, we need to get rid of this couch. Do you mind helping?
Yeah.
It's convenient. So anyway, we won't get into how I vote, but anyway, we can get into that in the next one we start talking about Paul.
Great. Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So,
then I'll piss everyone off. That'll be really good.
So, okay. So some labels, I think, like we're ready to jettison. But other labels, we continue to feel like we need to hold on to.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that again, going back to so I want to explore this idea that labels would go away. I mean, when could that? I guess that sounds to me that sounds like utopia, right?
Mhm. Sure.
That doesn't sound like something that is. I mean, I suppose if okay, so Hitchens had this talking point about that in 100,000 years, whatever humans evolve into at that point would resemble who we are today, no more than we resemble bacteria. Right. That's the idea, is that it would if evolution continues, then as long as we don't destroy ourselves, right, we will. But as long as we don't, then we will. Humans will not resemble what we are today. Maybe not 100,000 years. 100,000 years isn't right, but call it 2 million years. Then we wouldn't resemble what we are today. So in that case, maybe. But I still don't. I'm not sure that I can imagine a scenario in which labels aren't the default. And the reason is, and I'm not saying this is good. I'm not advocating for this. I'm just saying, like, I can't imagine a scenario in which it's not, because in order to make, okay, how do I want to say this? In order to make a decision, you have to categorize the world. Otherwise, you would never make any kind of decision. You would never move forward into anything unless there were categories of priority. Even, taking a step, like a literal physical step, you have to categorize taking that step here instead of there. And so it seems to me like now, I think where people get off track personally is that they engage in the naturalistic fallacy, right? The whole idea of, like, because this is what has been, that means it is what should be. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it should be. Obviously, I don't like the idea of labels. I think that it's good to try to break them down. I just don't. I guess I don't have a whole lot of hope that there's someday when they'll all be gone, right? And I think that it's part of the reason that I end up, and you probably have the same issue. What I end up, when somebody asks me a question about something, or I get into a conversation about something, I end up talking for 30 minutes before I've even come to the first word of the question that they ask.
Right? I do that. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Not maybe. I do. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Dan Carlin, who does the Hardcore History podcast, he has this phrase, which is that what does he say? All of history is prologue, right? And it's the curse of the curious, I think, which is, okay, you said this. What did you mean by that? All right. Well, that didn't answer anything. That just gave you, 10 more questions that I have, and I want you to explain those now. And then we keep going back, right? Back and back and back. I came to the position where I finally just said, okay, I'll call myself an atheist, at least to the people who are closest to me, who are, and that I feel like wouldn't be upset by that. So I don't want to upset people. Obviously, I don't talk to my grandmother about this, right? Because why? Why would I? There's no point. And also, I absolutely have no interest at all in convincing anybody that I'm right and they're wrong at all. I really genuinely don't. That's not I'm not saying that like I'm some sort of, moral person. I'm not attaching any moral to it. I just don't have any interest.
That's something we have in common.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Let's go. See, I'm not going to finish any thoughts.
No, okay, I'm sorry. Finish your thought.
No, that's okay. I want to get to that when you said that's something we have in common, because I think that goes to the question of, how can two people who I do think on paper have pretty, if we wrote out our positions on particular topics, political, religious, I think they probably would. You'd put them next to each other and you'd say, well, they're not going to probably get along very well, right? We're not going to end up in a group, but we do get along. We're good friends, I think, hopefully.
Too.
And so why is that? And I think my wife has a lot to say about that in her profession. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But when you say, we have that in common, I think we have a ton in common, that have nothing to do with the things that would make us an avatar of a particular ideology. Right. So anyway, back to what I was saying is that I don't talk to people about it because I don't have any interest in convincing them of anything. That's just part of my personality. And also I don't want to upset them. I really don't want to upset them. And I don't want to cause, I really don't want to cause problems. Like especially in a group, if the group is a group that is centered on trying to discuss a religious issue or discuss a Bible verse or something like that, I think that it would just be, I think that it would just be ugly to come in and start talking about how they're, that God doesn't exist. And, that would just be ugly and stupid. It just wouldn't, there's no point in it. Also, I'm fascinated by religion. I love religion. And subjectively, I experience a lot of things that people would probably call, faith or religion or, whatever. But so going with that, I did come to finally say, fine, I'll call myself an atheist, basically because I just kind of backed into it. I had all of these positions that I couldn't get away from, these ideas about the world that I couldn't get away from. And they all lined up under the atheist label, but I didn't want to call myself atheist, partly because I do think that the term atheist implies to most people a affirmative statement that there is not a God, right? That it's an affirmative statement. And that is that's a logical fallacy that doesn't make any sense if you start working through it. So that was why I never really said that about myself for a long time. But I think it's a fair label. If somebody wants to use that label, that's fine. And I do use it as a shortcut sometimes if I'm trying to get to a particular. That's what I think labels probably are good for, is the shortcut. But I would just want them to be honestly used. I want people to realize if you're using a shortcut, you're using a shortcut. That's not. That's not the whole map. That's
not all encompassing.
Yeah.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. Same thing with the word conservative. My wife just went to visit a friend in Indiana who she's a longtime friend of ours, went to college with her. She and her husband, Democrats, voted Democrat their whole life. And Krista was saying something about me considering myself a conservative or whatever. And she was surprised. She was like, well, how? In what way is he conservative? She starts going through all, well, does he think this? Does he think this? No. Well, then how is he conservative? And so it's all of them are, all of these labels they work as shortcuts, I think. But again, I think that if you're not thoughtful about it, you become an avatar of these labels. And it's what, it's how Jordan Peterson talks about ideology, that ideology is a low resolution version of life, right? It takes everything and reduces it down to a couple of ideas. And as long as you have those ideas, then you know where you stand, I guess, is the idea. So I can see why they're comforting, but I don't have a whole lot of use for them,
Yeah, I think, man, I got all kinds of thoughts. So I just find them more divisive, right? Because I think even when you're using them to try to find affinity, right? So like, I don't remember if we said this already while we were recording, if this was something we talked about before we started. But when you meet someone and you try to make a friend for the first time, you're looking for that affinity. And I think that's where labels become helpful a little bit, right? So like, so for me, and meet somebody. Where you're from? I'm from Ohio. Oh, great. Where in Ohio are you from? Oh, well, we're from Cleveland. Okay, so I'm going to make certain assumptions about you at this point.
Yep.
One is that you're probably going to, if you follow sports, you're going to be an Indians fan / Guardians fan, or you're going to be a Cleveland Browns fan.
Yeah.
If you like basketball, maybe a Cavs fan, but maybe not, because but you're probably going to be an Ohio State fan. And so then we begin to sort of narrow in on that. Or if you're not, but you like outdoors, well, let's talk about the Valley. Let's talk about the metro parks. There's all kinds of things that we can talk about because we have found that thing.
Yeah.
But I think that's helpful at the very beginning. But but then what happens is it becomes destructive. Because, let's take a different example.
Yeah.
We get together and it is, I really think there needs to be gun reform.
Okay.
All right. Let's just go there.
All right.
All right. And,
wading in slowly.
And so I really think there needs to be gun reform. So I surround myself with other people who believe in gun reform. Right. And so you're going to label us as progressives, probably. And so we're going to come together. And the one thing is that we all agree on that. And so friendships begin to form. But then immediately what happens is we then begin to identify who the enemy is.
Sure.
And again, we use the same labels. We begin to use labels to create enemies. And what I'm saying is, and kind of going back around, where is it ever going to be possible where there is no such thing as labels? What if it's really just a reduction of? Like where in the world we live in today, we continue to break things down with label until it becomes, well, I am not just a pastor, but I'm a progressive pastor. I'm a United Methodist progressive pastor, right? Which then, as soon as you say United Methodist, adds another layer to it. Or you could, or if you want to remove that, I am a United Methodist pastor in the Southeast jurisdiction, which makes me different than like the Pacific Northwest, right? And and I am a white heterosexual United Methodist pastor in the Southeast jurisdiction, living in Tennessee, who is progressive. And so you continue to break that down. But what I'm saying is maybe eventually we can get to the point where we begin to pull out of that, where what if, man, this is a leap. I'm doing far more mental gymnastics in my head than I can actually articulate. But what if you used the word utopian earlier? What if what I believe, what I choose to believe, is that at some point there will be a change in this world that will come about. And that if God, as I understand God, again, I'm going back to this idea of light and dark, reign of God versus the kingdoms of the world versus the kingdom of God, right? Whatever you want to, all the different ways that the Bible uses to describe that there's these two different realities that are going on.
Okay.
Right? And that if God is this creative, loving force that moves through all things and through which all things find their origin, which is about the only definition I can come up with right now. When I say the word God, what I think of, which some might argue puts me in a different camp than I claim to be. But
I'm sure some might argue that. Yeah.
And so then what if, as we enter into that reign where that is the thing, then the defining label becomes beloved.
Okay. And what does that mean?
Right. No, I know. Eventually, because then how do you break that down?
So
because we are, as human beings, we are meaning-making creatures.
That's yes.
We make meaning of things that otherwise are meaningless. And we do it all the time. Like you'll be at a restaurant,
all the time,
right? And you'll see a couple having a conversation, and the conversation gets heated. And immediately we'll try to fill in what just happened in that conversation, and we'll make meaning of what we're seeing. Well, he just broke up with her, or she just told him that, right? And all of a sudden, I remember one time I had been reappointed, and I thought the greatest thing that I could do, the best way to break the news to my family that we're going to be moving, is I'm going to take them out for dinner. And then afterwards, I'm going to buy everybody ice cream because everybody loves ice cream, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to tell them in the middle of this restaurant that guess what? We're moving. But it's going to be okay because we're eating ice cream.
And also because you're in public, so no one can stab you and get away with it.
But what happened was all of a sudden my entire family is crying.
Right.
And all I could think of is people are looking at me going, he just told his wife he's wanted to divorce.
Or that he's got stage 4 or something.
Right.
You know?
And and so anyway, all that to say, we immediately make meaning. And so maybe labels, not maybe, I think that labels are connected to our attempt to make meaning.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a lot of thoughts about that. For one, your example of I see the couple in the restaurant and the argument's getting heated or whatever, and you're making meaning. I think you're absolutely right that you're making meaning in that, and you're pulling from your own experience, of course, right?
Yes.
What you're really doing is you're thinking about yourself in that scenario. That's really what's happening, is that you're imagining yourself in that scenario. Even if you're not picturing it like a movie, you're feeling some emotions from it, and you're projecting those emotions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm cutting you off. I apologize, but I don't want to lose this thought.
Yeah.
Judgment is based on my opinion.
Yep.
Right? And we talked about this before. But my judgment is based on what I perceive to be the right thing.
Yeah.
And I put that on you, right? Or whoever.
Yep.
And so just like you're saying, in that situation, I am interpreting what I'm seeing through my own experiences and through my own expectations.
Yep.
Right? So then what happens is, if you don't live the certain way that I think you should, once you claim to be this, then I judge you. All right? So if you claim to be a Christian, my understanding of Christian is these 14 things or 17 things, or if you're Martin Luther, it's 99 or whatever, right? And so then
by the way, 99% of it is invisible to you. It's all.
I have no idea.
You don't even realize that these are the assumptions that you have, of course. Otherwise, if you had to think about it all the time, you'd never move through life.
But you say you're a Christian, but I saw you at the restaurant the other day when your meal came out, you didn't pray.
Sure. That's an easy one.
Okay.
Yep.
And so all of these things, or you say you're a Christian, but you're willing to sit and have a conversation and not try to convict the atheist that he needs to repent or he's going to go to hell.
Sure.
How could you call yourself a Christian? Right? Or you call yourself an atheist. How is it that you can have an intellectual conversation with a Christian who we all know they're stupid?
They're stupid, and they have contributed to so much pain in this world. How can you not try to convince, or how can you participate in a group discussion about religion without bringing up the facts that this whole thing has caused more wars and more blah 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 blah, right? That's obviously I'm voicing the it's not what I think, but it's
that's podcast number 2, Church and State. And I can't wait to talk about that. So okay, so maybe my position is shifting on this conversation.
Okay.
Maybe if there are such thing as, how do we? All right. The moment I said that the one label then becomes beloved, the question is, well, how do you define that? Like, what does that mean? Because you're still going to have to unpack that.
Yep.
Right. So maybe if there is at some point labels that just, how do you get to the point where they're used for affinity and not for division? And I think maybe what it comes down to is I have to actually come face to face with my own. I have to be willing to understand that there's nuance. And I have to be willing to set down my desire to judge you based on the labels that you've either given yourself or I've chosen to give you.
Okay. I like the idea of how do you use it for affinity and not division. Uh, My my wife Krista, who's a therapist, has always said, and she'd say it much better than I'm going to right now. I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but she always says something along the lines of, if you sit and honestly learn somebody's story long enough, it's impossible to hate them. You can't honestly get to know someone, really get to know them well, and still have them be the villain. It's impossible. And what she means by that is there's everybody who comes in and sits on her couch is the villain in somebody else's story. Everyone is, right? But she sits with them. She hears their story over and over, week after week or whatever for years. And she gets to know the path that this person took. And so what I think about is, when you're talking about the labels for affinity, it sounds really similar to, I mean, when you're saying you meet somebody and they say, I'm from Ohio, and then you go, oh, okay, like what part of Ohio? What I'm hearing is, I'm from the clan McDougal.
Mm.
Oh, McDougal. I know that clan. That, yeah, that's my second cousin's. I'm saying this wrong, but that's two families over. We've had some dealings with them, and it's been pretty positive. I feel like immediately, I'm not going to say this out loud, and I probably don't think it, but immediately I have a subconscious idea that you're probably not going to kill me, right? And so I feel a little bit safe with you. Okay, what part? Oh, I'm from Cincinnati. Okay. Oh, my, we make jokes about this. You hear people make jokes about this. Like, somebody says, I'm from Florida. Oh, I have a brother in Florida. His name is Tom. Do you know him? Right. And that's like a funny joke. But the reason people are doing that, it's very ancient, right? It's a very ancient way of in a world where the people just over there might come over here and kill you and take your kid as a slave, or take all your stuff and whatever. In that type of world, feeling like they know, your cousin knows them immediately is a safety measure in a way that I don't think that we can really understand except at a superficial level. And everything in our society is, I can't remember the word. Basically, it's a symbol of, or it's not a symbol. Symbol is not the right word, but it's a different version of the things that humanity used to do in order to stay safe, continue to exist, all that kind of stuff. So, I like, when somebody says I'm from California, I do have a feeling. I have a feeling like, oh, you're from my tribe. Now that's silly. I don't actually think it, right? And they don't know me, but it's an immediate feeling. So that seems like maybe it's okay. The idea of I want to break down the labels. When you were talking about the all of the different labels, I'm a progressive pastor in Tennessee, part of the United, and you have all of these different things. I relate to that because I want to tell people all of the stories that make me up, and all of the, yes, I would consider myself this, but really I'm this, and I'm also this and this and this and this and this. To me, that sounds like ego. That is me wanting to control how you see me, right? And I want you to have exactly the picture that I want you to have of me at all times. And it seems to me like the the best way to break down labels, and maybe the only place to do it, is internally, and to recognize when I'm doing that, and to let go of, for me, to let go of the need or the expectation for you to have the particular label that I want you to have for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so maybe that's it. So to your question, how do you make it an affinity and less divisive? In my opinion, the only way to do that is to learn about that person,
Mm-hmm.
to share and to share a life with them in some way. Be curious about their actual life and not their positions, right? If I have if I've got a position on firearms, Second Amendment, there's some reason I have that position, right? And if you have a position about gun control, there's some reason. And it might be because you've seen news stories about school shootings. But why did those news stories about school shootings affect you in the way that it affected you, and affect me in a way maybe that it affected me in maybe a different way? Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe there's something else there also. My point just being, there's always something behind it. And that thing behind it usually goes back to, and it seems to me, a 5-year-old kid
Mm.
who's scared
Mm.
or hurt or felt some love from somebody, or felt safe or didn't feel safe or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it usually goes back to, some experience that created the structure of your personality that you don't even realize is there, and is the assumption, the assumptions that you make for the world.
Yeah, which gets us into the conversation that we had this past Sunday about value. At what point in your life are your values formed, and then it takes a significant emotional event in order to change the value. And then is the value actually changing, or is the way you identify or define the value or shape that value, the way that value is shaped, is that what changed?
Yeah.
When you're talking about this idea that the reason that I'm so eager to tell you all these things about me is because I want to control the narrative and sort of don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of I want to have the power. I want to be in control of how you see me and all that. I kind of think like,
I hope that didn't come across as me talking about you. I was meaning about me.
No. Actually, I was going to say I don't feel that way. Like,
okay,
because you said it's egocentric, and I guess it is to an extent in that it's about you. But I think too, like, if I'm doing that, it's because I care enough, usually, about what that person's opinion is about me. And so I'm actually doing it not because I'm trying to control, maybe a little bit, I guess, if I'm going to be honest, but if I'm going to think enough about it, but also because I'm willing to be vulnerable with that person and show them who I really am. Right? Because a lot of times I am willing to hide behind the labels because I don't really want to be vulnerable with you. Right? But then when I get to know you and trust you, then I'm willing to share those things with you. I also, you mentioned Krista. I don't remember what and I get it about right. This idea that the closer you are to me as a person, the more I attribute your actions to like negative actions to external forces. The further you are from me, the more I attribute those very same negative actions as to internal motivations.
Yep.
And I think that goes along the lines of what you're saying with this idea that if you get to know somebody, like you can't, what did you say, hate them? Or
they can't be the villain.
The villain, right? Because you begin to understand, like, or at least you try to, or you give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that benefit of the doubt, assuming the best of people, might be a good step, right? And I look at politics, and this will segue into next time. But I look at politics, and I think that where we're at right now is we're all assuming the worst of the different labels, right? So
absolutely,
if I am a Democrat, then I am going to assume the worst of those Republicans. And I don't even know about libertarians.
You can assume the worst about us. That's fine.
Right. And so maybe part of the conversation too with labels is maybe the best we can do is set down our assumptions about the labels, hold on to them loosely.
Yeah, best of luck.
Right.
Best of luck, man.
But right. But I think going back to
I
the
agree
idea
with
of the
you, but
community, right?
yeah, yes.
So like going back to the community we're trying to create. I think it's because let's be honest, I can't do this on my own, right? Even if somehow like, oh, whatever. You see how quickly I just want to drop all the labels about me,
Yeah.
right? Like, well, because really, okay, one last round here with the labels. I push back against them pretty hard. I don't like being looked at as the leader.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, because I think, again, as leader, what are the expectations that somebody, as soon as I claim that name, that label for myself, okay, if I'm willing to grab onto a label and claim it for myself, I have to be willing to also then take all of everyone else's assumptions of what that means.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I just don't think there's any way around it anyway. I don't know. I don't know that there's any way. I mean, whether you're going to accept the assumptions that come along with the label or not, the assumptions are coming along, and I know you don't like. We have a lot of conversations against you. One of them is going to be which Enneagram number you are, because I know you really like that conversation
I love
a lot.
that. Yeah,
it's your
we need to write
favorite
down what we need to talk about.
favorite
Yeah.
conversation. But yeah, I mean, as a community, if we're going to be able to keep the labels from being divisive, and we expect that there will be people in our community that will have different labels, if that's the goal,
I think
because it doesn't have to be, but
I think it has to be.
Okay. I like that as a goal. I want that as a goal.
Because otherwise we're just like everybody else.
And that is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And that is the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I think it's because, personally, it's the most natural. But again, I don't think that just because things always have been, that means that they always should be, right? So I'm with you. On this. If that's going to be the case, then yeah, I think for me, I'm going to say this for me. What I have to do is I have to constantly stay, as much as possible, I have to stay cognizant of the reaction that I am having when people say things that are, even if they don't realize it, code words for their labels. I have to stay cognizant of my own reaction internally so that I can continue seeing them and not the avatar that's being produced, right? That's what I have to do. So maybe that would be helpful for other people. I'm not the pastor, Jeff, so I don't have to tell people what to do like you have to. I'm just kidding.
I don't like to tell people what to do.
I'm just kidding. I know. But what I'm saying is that's the only pathway, or the only tactic that it seems to me like will have a shot is always, for me, going to be internal. It's going to be examining my own reaction and trying to be honest about my own reaction and trying to continue to see that person and not let myself. So I do the exact same things. Listen, people use code words all the time that project their avatar. All the time in our community and everywhere. I do it the same. I do the same thing.
More about that.
I absolutely do the same thing. And so,
Give me an example.
I mean,
Feel free to use me if you want.
yeah, I was going to say, okay, if you describe yourself as cis,
Okay.
that's going to be a code word. And
Absolutely.
if you don't describe yourself as cis, that's going to be a code word.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's something else. Let's see.
Okay, here's one I think. An illegal or an undocumented.
There you go. That's an easy one. That's an easy political one. You're absolutely right. That's a good one. Illegal or undocumented. That's a code word. And the best code words, I think, are ones that you don't realize you're using.
Mm.
Right? Those are the best, because then it's integrated itself. The avatar has integrated itself into your personhood, and you're identifying with it fully, or more fully,
Right.
I think. And that's what I think is dangerous. So I think, it does no good for me to point out somebody else's avatar.
Oh, but I'm curious. I want you to point out to me when I use code words.
Well, okay. I mean, I guess that would be, it could be interesting. Of course. Yeah. Of course you would want me to do that, but I just need, so for interest's sake, yeah, maybe, but I'm saying for the cohesion of a group or to try to connect, I don't think it does any good for me to point out code or an avatar of somebody else.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Because if they point it out to me, my immediate response before I have any cognition is going to be defensive. It's going to be.
I think that that's natural, right? Because if I'm pointing it out, what I'm trying to do is point out a difference.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So immediately I'm pushing. So one last thought, one last question. Okay, so I am committed to this endeavor of creating a community where all persons experience a sense of belonging, right? Regardless of all the things. Now, the reason I'm committed to that is because as I read the New Testament, I get a sense that, and again, it's very much has to do with the way I'm reading it, what's on my mind, all that kind of thing. But when I read it, I get a sense that the greatest, I'm going to use the word testimony, that the Christian church has to this world today about the impact, the potential of what it looks like to follow Jesus and to be part of this thing is that we should be able to live in a community like that, which, as we've already said, the rest of the world cannot do. It's just because of the use of labels and the avatars and all these things we've just talked about for about an hour. The world's not capable of doing that. So that's why I'm committed to it as a progressive pastor. Why, as a conservative atheist, would you want to be part of that?
Okay. I'll start off with a little bit of disagreement. I don't think it's unique to Christianity to want to pursue this this level of connection with people and with community. I think that predates Christianity.
Okay.
I think that the theologies that came out that come from the Christian traditions drew on other traditions and other evolutionary skills that had to have already been there. Otherwise, we wouldn't have gotten to where we had gotten anyway. Okay. So that's my throwaway. That's just the throwaway.
Actually, let me say one thing about that. Okay. So then is it, and I have no problem with that statement. How about the greatest thing that we have to offer right now as a Christian church is that model of community?
That's fine. I have no problem with that.
Okay.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I mean, okay. So,
Christianity's attempt to be the moral police has failed miserably.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Okay.
And that could be hyperbole.
I think that, that's so sweet. We're not starting another episode here.
This could all just be segue.
It's okay. That's fine.
All right. So back to then.
Why do I want to? Okay. So, I, want less suffering and not more. I want more, people to be seen. I know you and I have talked about this before, but the evangelical, Protestant Christian church is my home.
Mm-hmm.
It's my culture. It's my first language. It was my parent and my tribe when I grew up in a chaotic way. It was my uncle and my aunt and my grandma and my grandpa, and you can't just not be a part of your family anymore. You can stop seeing your family, and you can argue with your family at Thanksgiving, and you can disagree with everything that your family thinks, possibly. I'm not saying I disagree with everything the church thinks. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying to the extreme, but you can't be like, and also I wasn't born from this woman, right? That's just, there's certain things, sorry, that's just what happened. The evangelical church is my family. And so, I have found this community to be, I will say I found this community to be unique. Very unique. Not perfect.
No.
I probably shouldn't even say that. That's such a throwaway statement because everyone says it's not perfect, but nobody is. But that's what everyone always says. But I have found it to be unique, mostly because of what you're talking about, which is that you are committed to having a place where everyone feels welcome. And without getting too deep into my historical perspective, I do think, and we can talk about the book, the Fourth Turning, at another time. But I do think that generationally, we're in a time of conflict. That conflict is just going to continue to become more and more extreme until it finds its catharsis in some sort of finality, and then we will start over again. I do think that that's the case, and I would like to have a place where my kids and as many other people as want to join can find some safety in that. I do have concerns about the rising level of conflict everywhere. And as I've talked to other people about this, if you've ever been in a long-term relationship with someone who knows you very well and can say at some point, where the tension is rising and just says to you, like, do we need to have a fight? Do we just need to have a fight? and then you can go, well, no, I don't want to have, I think we need a fight. And then then you have the fight. And as long as you fight fair, and you don't call names and whatever, the fight, it's cathartic. You make up, and it's like it's something humans have to do. And I do think that societies get to that place also. And I think that for the last 15 years, we have been getting closer and closer to that place where just everyone wants to have it out. We want it. Let it burn, right? That's the feeling. And maybe it's because I'm 42 now and I'm not 24, but I would like to not have it burn. I would like to have something left over. And so I'm committed because I think, the people in this community are good people. It's my home. I'm fascinated by religion and human nature and philosophy anyway. I have, and so does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Living on Common Ground. If you enjoyed the conversation, please follow the show and share it with your friends. The more people we can get living on common ground, the better the world will be.